Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants joining from across Africa and beyond. I am pleased to welcome you to the third and final webinar in the African-led HIV Control Working Group 2026 series, focused on regulatory, environment, and resilience partnership models. Before we begin, let me share housekeeping and session guidelines with you. All participants are muted to ensure smooth session. Please share your reflections via the chat. We will address questions during the Q&A segment towards the end. This session is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. And if you're experiencing any technical issues, kindly notify us in the chat. We have a live caption available. To enable captions, click Show Captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Select your preferred language, and if you don't see the CC button, click More Options and select Captions. Caption will appear on your screen throughout the webinar. Here are the speakers for this webinar. I am the moderator of this webinar. I am professor specializing in infectious diseases. I am a member of the African-led HIV Control Group. I am also vice president of the Society for AIDS in Africa and board member for the Eastern Mediterranean region at the Global Fund. And I am pleased to introduce our speakers, Dr. Mohgar Kamal Yani, Mr. Alex Juma Ismail, Mr. Robert Agayarbo, and Dr. Priscilla Niam Bayo. Thank you once again for joining us today. We have a rich program ahead that will explore the policy, manufacturing, procurement, partnership dimension of health sovereignty and access in Africa. We will begin with a series of expert presentations examining the local manufacturing and regulatory landscape, procurement, reform, and supply chain sovereignty, and what equitable health partnership should look like in practice. We will then move into moderated panel discussion focused on continental policy coherence and the transition agreements, bringing together the key themes raised throughout the presentations. Following the panel, we will open the floor for participant question and discussion. Thereafter, Mr. Robert will give us some reflections on practical priorities for governments, institutions, and civil society. We will then conclude with reflections on commitment, priorities for actions, and path forward, followed by a short interactive Mentimeter exercise before our final reflections and closing remarks. Before we begin, I would like to offer a few opening remarks to frame our discussion today. This webinar concludes a three-part series that has progressively built a shared understanding of what health and HIV sustainability requires. In webinar 1, we examined financing architecture and the importance of protected intentional domestic financing systems. In webinar 2, we explored the policy and legal frameworks that give those financing decision durability, coherence, and accountability. Today, we move to the operational layer for the health system, the system through which financing and policy are translated into real-world access to medicines and services. The central question guiding today's discussion is whether Africa health supply systems are built on African terms, or whether structural dependency continues to shape how medicines are produced, regulated, procured, and delivered. This question has become increasingly urgent in the context of ongoing transition in global health financing, where vulnerabilities are no longer only financial, but also operational, visible in supply chains, procurement systems, regulatory processes, and community delivery platforms. Across the continent, important progress is being made. We are seeing the operationalization of the African medicines agencies, the emergence of local pharmaceutical production capacity, and early examples of African manufactured medicines entering multilateral procurement channels. At the same time, structural challenges remain, particularly in manufacturing concentration, procurement dependency, intellectual property constraints, and the fragmentation of the partnership models. Today's discussion will therefore focus on four interconnected areas. The first, local manufacturing and diagnostic production. Second, regulatory harmonization and the role of African medicines agencies. Third, procurement systems and supply chain resilience. And fourth, equitable partnership models for access to medicines. We are joined today by experts from continental institutions, regulatory authorities, global health governance, and civil society leaderships. I look forward to rich, practical, and solution-oriented discussion. To start us off, I would like to hear from our audience, and please take a moment to respond in one or two words to our first multimeter question. What is the biggest barrier to health sovereignty in your country? Please scan the QR code and start to answer. You have 1 minute to access to multimeter and 1 minute to type your answers. I think we can start. I see that 11. Yes, please, you have 1 minute to answer. Please start answering. Thank you for answering. I can give you more time for that. We will stop within 15 seconds. So please continue. So we can stop there. And thank you for your responses. We will return to some of this insight later in the session. And let us now move to our first presentation. As you know, financing and policy frameworks create the foundation for sustainability. However, sovereignty ultimately depends on whether countries can shape the systems that produce, regulate, procure, and deliver health products. We begin with one of the most important foundations of that agenda: manufacturing capacity and the regulatory systems that make scale, quality, and market access possible. Our first speaker is Mr. Alex Juma Ismail. He's technical lead for products evaluation and scientific opinion at the African Medicines Agencies. He brings deep technical expertise in medicines regulation, regulatory convergence, and continental coordination mechanisms aimed at strengthening Africa's capacity to assure the quality, safety, and efficacy of health products. He will help us situate Africa evolving pharmaceutical and diagnostics manufacturing landscape within the broader context of regulatory harmonization and the operationalization of the African Medicine Agency. Mr. Alex Juma Ismail, welcome. The floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Prof. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, colleagues. As introduced, my name is Alex Juma Ismail. I work for the African Medicines Agency as a technical lead in the product evaluation and scientific opinions team. So my job here is to just give you an overview and a picture of the local manufacturing of pharmaceuticals and diagnostics in Africa, and also the landscape in terms of regulating these products since the creation of some of the initiatives on the continent. Next slide. So, for context and for us to understand is that, and I think most of us are aware that we have a challenge when it comes to local manufacturing in Africa. For pharmaceuticals, this includes medicines, vaccines, and other biological products, as well as for medical devices, which include in vitro diagnostics. We have over 600 pharmaceutical manufacturers across the continent. This number might look big, but it's actually a very small number compared to the population of the continent, disease burden, and so many other factors that requires these products. And the other challenge is that the strongest cluster of this one is the North African region. You can see that most of the manufacturers are situated in Egypt, in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. That is North Africa. And you have one West African country, Nigeria, one East African country, Kenya, and also one Southern African country, which is South Africa. And there's no country in the Central African region. And this shows you that over 85% of the continent's manufacturing is happening in the North African region. Next slide. Yeah, so why this is a challenge? It's a lot of dependence, and I saw in the Mentimeter, I think some of the responses were talking about dependence on imports, which is true, and this dependence not only on the finished pharmaceutical products themselves, but also the raw materials. We know majority of APIs on the continent are imported, not even majority, I think over 99.9% of what we need on the continent is imported in terms of APIs. And other raw materials like packaging, over 80%. We have other materials that are needed for manufacturing of these products, like excipients in the pharmaceuticals, reagents in the diagnostic space. All of these raw materials are imported, and significant dependence on some of the consumables that will also be needed, for example, for studies to establish, let's say, performance, for example, in the diagnostic space. And in the context of this convening, where HIV is of interest, the viral load and the molecular testing platforms largely sourced externally as well. And also there are a lot of challenges in terms of supply chains that we've been seeing, and how vulnerable these supply chains are on the continent because of lack of systems that would allow these products to smoothly reach their intended targets. Next slide. So the other piece of information that I wanted to share is the evolution of regulation on the continent. Some might know, some might not. We started harmonization of requirements as a response to local production. There's a policy that was adopted by the African Union Assembly of Heads of States and Governments in 2005, known as the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa. But as we started implementation, we had developed business plan for this plan, but we also realized that the main challenge is fragmented systems, fragmented requirements. So we created a harmonization program known as the AMRH, which was established in 2009 and started implementation in the East African region in 2012. And this was basically an idea to prove a concept before we can negotiate with the policymakers to create a continental agency. 15 years later, the African Medicines Agency is here, and its operation started last year. And the idea for AMA is to basically provide or create a block, one block in terms of regulatory processes on the continent, and to provide that platform where a manufacturer can get a single opinion, if that makes sense, for that would be then applicable to multiple countries on the continent, if not all of them, if not all 55 member states of the African Union. And so this is an equivalent of the European Medicines Agency, if you know, and the idea is to try not to replace the national regulatory authorities, but bring them together. And we've been seeing this as a missing piece for many years. So what we have now is that there is a linkage between systems that are operating at regional level, systems that are operating at national level to the entire continent, providing that incentive that is needed for Africa to also attract investment in pharmaceutical manufacturing. Next slide. So we want to be informed by research and science in all the designs of these processes. We established a regulatory program, kind of a simulated centralized procedure for the African Medicines Agency. We wanted to pilot first before we can adopt for the African Medicines Agency. And we launched this pilot in 2023. We have implemented it for 2 years until October of 2025. And these are the numbers that we were able to see. We learned a lot of lessons from this process, which we then use to design the African Medicines Agency so that it's responsive, and also it is able to meet what is intended to. So we received 64 expression of interest from across the globe. We shortlisted only 24 that were meeting criteria in terms of their complexity, the disease that they're targeting, as well as the nature of the products themselves. We assessed 21 out of those, and 12 of those received a positive recommendation. And then we were able to study how they behaved, across different countries in terms of countries taking those decisions from the continental process. The main information that I also wanted to share, it's not appearing in terms of numbers, is that in the 64, at least with a lot of applications from local manufacturers in Africa. I think of 20 applications came from local manufacturing. In the shortlisted, we were able to shortlist based on the criteria for submissions and all these other complex issues. We were only able to shortlist 6 of them, but only one made it to the 12. So only one product actually was listed from the local manufacturing, meaning only one was able to meet the standards that we had adopted on the continent. Next slide. In terms of diagnostics and the HIV gaps, I think I've covered just a bit of this, but just to also insist on the fact that there is limited local production of HIV diagnostics. There are currently 3 manufacturers that are considered to a scale that they can assist in the continent. 2 of those are based in, I think, in Nigeria, and 1 is in Senegal. They face the same challenge: dependence on imports for most of the materials and the technologies that they need. They also face the same challenge of fragmented systems if they are to get approvals that would apply to multiple countries. And we addressed this by creating also a continental pathway for in vitro diagnostics and piloted last year in the Mpox outbreak. Also, there's a lot of issues in terms of after these products are approved or are allowed into the market, in terms of their performance and safety after they are allowed to circulate in different markets. So the need for us to establish also very strong post-market surveillance and post-approval activities in terms of regulating these products. Next slide. I think I'm left with 2 or 3, yeah, 2 or 3 slides. So why regulatory convergence matters? I might be preaching to the converted here, but what we need convergence because it will create an environment where we are able to access these products faster, and products that are meeting the quality, safety, and effectiveness standards that we desire. Reduce duplication for manufacturers. They won't have to produce so many filings and submissions to multiple countries, which comes with a cost, which also translates into the cost that is, is incurred by patients or by governments and public sectors. And also having convergence improves efficiency because you are able to utilize the limited resources that you have. Also, you are able to better prepare for, public health emergencies and be able to effectively respond to them when they come. Next. Yeah, it's a bit of a repetition. It's just to say, once these are implemented, you have larger predictable market for manufacturers. You attract investment because then they'll only be looking at one requirement or single assessment process or inspection pathways and all that, and also support the sovereignty that we are currently strongly pushing for, and which will then eventually translate into a better access to quality assured products. Next slide. I believe that was my last one. Yeah, these are recommendations. I've spoken to them in my previous slides. Just as a summary, is to make sure that we accelerate this African Medicines Agency operationalization, which we've started, strengthen diagnostics manufacturing. As I said, we still need to invest more in this area, expand the reliance mechanism, and also invest in the workforce, because that's where the challenge is, and support regional practices and for production hubs. I think this is my last slide, Prof. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alex, for the very informative presentation on manufacturing in Africa. Thank you also for highlighting the 5 relevant recommendations, and we will certainly revisit some of them later in the discussion. So manufacturing capacity is essential, but products must also move through procurement and supply chain systems that are efficient, accountable, and resilient. The second presentation will address procurement reform, regulatory systems, and supply chain sovereignty. Our next speaker is Dr. Priscilla Nyambayo, head of the Pharmacovigilance and Clinical Trials Division at the Medicine Control Authority of Zimbabwe. She's a clinical pharmacologist and regulatory expert who has played a leading role in strengthening Zimbabwe national pharmacovigilance system, including the development of health product safety surveillance frameworks and clinical trial oversight mechanisms. She has also contributed to WHO support initiatives and regional regulatory strengthening efforts, particularly in vaccine safety monitoring and pharmacovigilance system development across Africa. She brings a critical perspective on how regulatory systems ensure not only access to medicines, but their ongoing safety, quality assurance, and public trust, elements that are central to sustainable health system sovereignty. Dr. Priscilla, you have 10 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I suggest Joanna shares my slides, please. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much. So, as most of you know, just a summary of our challenges as Africa. So, I am the head for pharmacovigilance and clinical trials in Zimbabwe, as you have been told. So, my experience is more with the SADC region. However, I'm also a member of the WHO AVRF and also was a chairperson for the Vigilance Committee for the African Medicines Initiative. And we have trained a lot of countries in my office on benchmarking visits for clinical trials regulation and pharmacovigilance. So, as you know, Africa continues to carry approximately 65% of the HIV global burden, and yet most of the medicines, as you have heard from Alex, they are imported. So African countries import between 70 to 100% of finished pharmaceutical products, 90 to 100% APIs, medical devices, and approximately 99% of vaccines. And HIV and TB products remain highly import dependent. So with the emergence of the African Medicines Agency, acronym AMA, the African Pooled Procurement Mechanism, APPM, and the AFI, CFTA, and Africa CDC, PHAHM, and the strengthening of the WHO Maturity Level 3 initiatives. They are really provide unprecedented opportunities for procurement, reform, and supply chain resilience. Next slide, please. So my presentation will sort of break down what this means and looking at the several challenges and the pillars. So the first one is the current HIV regulatory and procurement environment in Africa. So as we have said, we depend on imported HIV products. And the other challenge is the fragmented markets, small country procurement volumes, different regulatory requirements. For instance, in SADC, we have 16 countries, and we started the Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Zanzibar, South Africa. regulatory initiative some years ago, whereby a market authorization order can apply through one system. However, countries then still make their own decisions. So that platform has been sponsored by Gates Foundation and World Bank over the years, and it has been very critical in bringing harmonization in the SADC region for applications for registration of medicines. So it primarily focuses on market authorization and GMP inspections. And it's also an excellent platform for capacity building of the NRIA officers in the region. So, but however, we still have this small country procurement challenges, different regulatory requirements, and separate registration processes for most products. There's variable quality assurance systems. This is not to say there's no quality system, they are there. But as you know, 9 maybe out of the 54 member states have attained maturity level 3, WHGBT level 3, and most are matured level 2 or level 1 in some cases. And so there's also the duplicate dossier reviews, which Alex also alluded to. And the viral load supply chain vulnerabilities, reagent stockhouse, long procurement lead times, equipment downtime, service contract gaps, limited local technical support, and poor transport systems for specimens. However, for instance, in my country now, the clinical trials, they now have the biobanks that are up to minus 85 degrees. So you find that different countries are building also capacity for sample analysis locally and storage. Next slide, please. So we now look at the Africa procurement reform in practice, and we look at the wonderful initiative of the African Pooled Procurement Mechanism, APPM, and the Africa CDC and Africa Union were very critical in bringing this platform into place since 2024. So this is a welcome platform. And the objective of this platform, APPM, is to aggregate continental demand, improve affordability, reduce market fragmentation, increase bargaining power, and support local manufacturers, and also improve the supply security. And this applies to most ARVs and HIV products. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's also need for the supply chain sovereignty framework, which has got 4 pillars, where we are looking at the manufacturing sovereignty to then say, how do we build capacity locally in Africa? Given the 10 minutes, I'm going to mention Africa, but as you know, different regions and countries have different systems, but we are talking about the Africa perspective. And regional ARV production hubs, local reagent production, local diagnostics assembly, technology transfer partnerships. And I think technology transfer partnerships, they really play a key role. Then we also look at the regulatory sovereignty, the African Medicines Agency welcome initiative that my colleague Alex mentioned. So here we need to promote unity, I think, and trust among African countries, among regulators, so that this regional harmonized platform in all the regions, the RECs, they are really, utilized. And even in the regulatory sovereignty, people can use reliance model where you can rely on other reputable regulators when they make the right decisions with regards to safety, quality, and effectiveness of medicines. you can trust that. In some countries like the EMA, they even go up to mutual recognition where they have legislation to then simply accept the decision that has been made by another regulator, but they also have information sharing agreements. So I think for Africa, then the regulatory systems and the legislation, like the African model law, and AMA needs to really have robust legislation system so that this becomes a reality and practical. And also, so that also the WHO-GBT has tried to address this to have at least 9 regulatory functions. But so that as AMA, all these regulatory functions, they talk to each other and they work closely with each other, and more importantly, build trust with the member states so that member states can then trust the decisions that are being made. And then also to have the procurement sovereignty of pooled procurement and multi-country framework contracts, long-term procurement commitments, regional stockpiles, local content preferences, etc. One of the challenges with procurement of medicines in Africa and even Zimbabwe is maybe then how do you ensure that you are always getting the quality products from the same registered products or from the same country, from the same manufacturer. So the concept of having enforcement, good manufacturing practice, inspections. We do that in Zimbabwe, and the Zazibona platform that I manage. We then go and inspect the companies or market authorization holders that will have been registered. So again, enforcement and post-marketing surveillance will be very critical in this, and the data sovereignty aspects. Next slide, please. And so we also, the 4th pillar is regulatory strengthening strategic role of the African medicines agents. So the joint assessment, reliance, recognition pathways. However, in addition to the African medicines agencies, AUDA NEPAD, African Medicines Regulatory Initiative, since 2015, started a wonderful initiative where they identified regulators as centers of excellence. And so the WHO-GBT also has done the same to then say we must assess the capacity. So you find that most countries that are MO3, including Zimbabwe, they play a big role in training other regulators. And that's what I mentioned earlier on. So we train a lot of regulators and we call them the WHO-GBT MO3 benchmarking trainings where countries can come and we can work with them to assist them to become MO3. So this also with diagnostic regulation and regional IVD, you find this is also a new thing for Africa and even globally. For medical devices, IVDs, even globally, they are not, in some countries, they are not necessarily under a regulatory agency. So I think here that's where this sort of robustness and approach to things is then required, as long as you are assured of the safety, the quality, and the effectiveness of the products, and as long as they are monitoring system. So pharmacovigilance, safety monitoring, and post-marketing surveillance, market control is quite critical. And as you know, there's the Afro-Vigilance Initiative, MedSafety app. They are now monitoring both safety and counterfeit products, electronic systems, and the ISOP, International Society of Pharmacovigilance meeting was last held in Namibia last month, and that was really critical to bring together the African team and to work towards some harmonized processes. Next slide, please.
Dr. Priscilla, the topic is very relevant, but unfortunately the time is fast running. Could you please summarize?
Okay. Yeah, so really we are recommending short-term ways to approach these challenges, medium term and long term. And last slide, I think now, please. Next slide. Yeah. So I think it's really about addressing all this fragmentation that I've already talked about. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is like the framework then of how these different roles, the ministries, the partners, and everyone can play a part. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, so thank you very much. I'm done, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Prof. Joanne, you seem not to be hearing Prof. Maybe you could unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Priscilla, for the interesting presentation. We will definitely come back to some challenges of the regulatory and procurement environment in Africa later during discussion. So procurement decisions shape not only access to products, but also the long-term development of the national and regional health systems. We have explored the production and procurement. The next discussion turns to the partnership and governance arrangements that influence how this system operates. The next presentation will cover equitable partnerships, access to medicines, and country ownership. Our third speaker is Dr. Mohaga Kameliani, a global health and access to medicines expert with extensive experience in health financing, pharmaceutical policy, and global health governance. She has contributed significantly to global debates on equitable access to medicines, intellectual property regimes, and the political economy of health partnerships, with consistent focus on advancing country ownership and accountability in global health systems. She will help us unpack that equitable partnerships look like in practice, particularly in the context of shifting global financing and localization agenda. Dr. Mohaga, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Can you put the slides, please? Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and hello, everybody. Naharkum Said, as we would say in my country, which is like having a good day. So when I looked at the title I was giving, equitable partnership, what is equitable partnership? There's no real definition. So I thought, let's look at the ingredients of what you might call equitable partnership. So if you say the word equitable in kind of relation between two people or two organizations, it's about equal power, not extractive power. That's a critical thing for me, and it means who benefits from this partnership, and that takes us to the issue of sovereignty. So just in simple terms, if you have two partners, they have to have common goal that they agree upon, and they have to discuss and agree on the way towards achieving that common goal, how they're going to measure that what they achieved or not achieved, and also having clear responsibilities, who does what. And then comes the issue of funding, and that is one of our big problems, I would say, funding and technology. that's where we as Africans are relying on external input, whether it's donor funding or pharmaceutical companies and others who hold the technology. I will give two examples of the partnerships. One is about access to what comes from access to medicine, and I will talk about TRIPS, the trade related rule of intellectual property rights, which really govern technology transfer, in a sense, governs quite a lot of things. And the second example is also about access to technology, which comes from the current negotiation at WHO for the pandemic agreement. So next, please. Okay. So TRIPS, what's TRIPS? This trade-related agreement is when all the countries were negotiating to establish the World Trade Organization, the WTO. They were talking about removing trade barriers for goods and for services, but then the ones that hold the technology were saying, "Oh, what about intellectual property?" So that's why it's called trade related, because intellectual property at the time it wasn't like a big deal. So during the negotiation, here is the power relation again between the negotiators. So those of the North, just to give you an example, the US delegation had among the delegates, there were two people. One comes from Pfizer drug company and one comes from Microsoft technology company. So you can imagine what they pushed for. Developing countries also pushed for flexibilities, and that's what that's why we have in the TRIPS agreement what they call TRIPS flexibility. So the TRIPS agreement, in short, just a simple thing, before TRIPS, countries decided how long, whether they have a patent, how long it lasts, and patent on what. So like India, for example, and in our countries, Egypt, South Africa, they had their own patent rule, and that allowed the companies to produce medicines without infringing anything. After TRIPS, well, you can't do that because a company can file for a patent. Once they have the patent, it's on everything related to that product. So one medicine might have 700 patents, basically tying you that you can't really escape in any way and produce that medicine. Within the flexibilities that developing countries argued for and managed to get is something called compulsory license, where a government could say, I'm going to issue compulsory license for that product and let generics, whether it's local or in another country, make that product, and therefore is going to be very low price. And then they can make the product but the government can buy it, or I won't go into kind of technical details. However, when a country decides to issue compulsory license, they have huge pressure from the Europeans and from the US, and obviously from pharmaceutical companies. I think the latest one was Colombia issuing compulsory license on dolutegravir, which is a very important antiretrovirals for HIV. It took a long time to push the government to do that, to issue the compulsory license, but they were under gigantic pressure not to do it. So, and of course, because they use trade deals. I mean, you can think, when we think about medicine, we think only about medicine. But if you are a government, you think about your trade relation with those countries, where your military relation, your I don't know what relation. So there's lots of things that as a government you think about, not just a bit of that particular medicine, whatever it is. So the pressure normally is huge. So in Africa and in other countries, the reliance is on voluntary license. Basically, the main way of accessing technology is voluntary. So the latest medicine for prevention, lenacapavir, Gilead, the producing company, after a lot of pressure, by the way, they issued voluntary license for 6 companies, 4 in India, 1 in Pakistan, and 1 in Egypt. So the only company that we have in Africa is the Egyptian company to produce. They give them the technology to produce that medicine. They didn't give it to South Africa, by the way. South Africa has as you know, quite a lot of HIV. People living with HIV. So it's a company that dictates whether to give voluntary license, when to give it, to whom to give it, what conditionality, where you get the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient. So there's lots of conditionalities on the voluntary license. However, it did provide a lot of medicine in relation to HIV, especially the voluntary license that was not negotiated bilaterally between the likes of Gilead and generic X or generic Y, but that was negotiated via something called the Medicine Patent Pool, which was created in 2010, because the Medicine Patent Pool negotiate on behalf of public health. So they try to get the best conditionalities for on the voluntary license. However, voluntary license doesn't work all the time. So if you remember, during COVID, WHO and South Africa set up the mRNA vaccine hub in South Africa. South African researchers managed to produce what they call prototype, like the model, if you like, of the vaccine, just based on from the available literature. But they needed the know-how, so the technology know-how in order to go into development and production. And the 3 companies that hold the technology, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, utterly refused to share the know-how, utterly refused to share technology. So that was the South African hub couldn't produce the COVID vaccine. So during COVID, South Africa and India put a proposal to the World Trade Organization for something called TRIPS waiver. So let's waive the TRIPS rule because we are in a pandemic. So this is a very special situation. And at the time I was, and Julia was in the People Vaccine Alliance, we had a gigantic campaign all over the world. Everybody was campaigning for the TRIPS waiver, and the southern governments and the Africa group really had a very strong position. But the Europeans, the Americans, the Japanese, all the North, the holders of technology, played I would say, a game, basically, of delaying and derailing decision. So they kept asking India and South Africa questions. And then they will ask the same question. So they will produce answer. They ask another question. This is basically the same question in different ways, until we reach a stage where Pfizer and the likes had enough vaccines available and people in the North were vaccinated. So there was plenty of vaccines left that can go to Africa. So you don't need a TRIPS waiver. And then the virus went away, as it were. It wasn't a pandemic anymore. So that wasn't an equal partnership.
Dr. Morga, in interest of time, would it possible to wrap up?
Yeah, well, okay, I won't talk about that was just one thing on pandemic treaty, because it's really the position of the Africa group is super fantastic. The pressure on them is huge. They want to have access to technology and other things in the agreement, but facing a lot of pressure, and still the negotiation is going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morga, for the relevant presentation, and thank you for clarifying the role also of government, civil society, and raising some issues. So partnerships are most effective when they strengthen national priorities and institutions rather than create new dependencies. We have examined manufacturing, procurement, and partnerships separately. The next discussion will explore how this dimension interact and what they mean for health sovereignty in practice. To this end, we will dedicate the next 15 to 20 minutes to an interactive panel discussion involving our three speakers you already know, and Mr. Robert Aguiarbo, who is Senior Strategic Advisor for Health in the Office of the Commissioner of Health, Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development at the African Union Commission. Please join me in welcoming all our panelists. Dear speakers and panelists, thank you once again for accepting our invitations. We have heard the perspectives and manufacturing on manufacturing, regulation, procurement, pharmacovigilance, access to medicines, and partnership models. I will now like to bring these themes together and explore what they mean collectively for health sovereignty in Africa. I will start with a question to Mr. Alex on regulatory harmonization and manufacturing scale-up. Mr. Alex, what are the most binding regulatory constraints currently limiting the scale-up of local pharmaceutical and diagnostics manufacturing in Africa, and how African medicine agencies working to address this through harmonization efforts? In interest of time, please have a short answer on this. Please summarize. Thank you, Mr. Alex.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think I would say the biggest challenge on the continent is unpredictability and having systems that are not responsive to the needs of the continent. What do I mean by that? So you have regulators across the continent that are waiting for manufacturers to come to them, or are waiting for product developers to come to them. And the challenge that we have on the African continent is that most of them usually interact with generic manufacturers. And I will also take this opportunity to respond to the question that was put in the chat. Someone I think is struggling to understand the value proposition, the value addition of the African Medicines Agency. And so this is where the value for the African Medicines Agency comes. You know, when you have a continent of over 1.5 billion people with the highest disease burden, but hosting less than 10% of the clinical trials that are conducted globally, for example, and also being the last one to receive these innovations, and this is in both spaces, in the pharmaceutical space and also in the medical devices space. You need to ask yourself what is missing, what is the challenge there. And in most of our engagements, most of our studies and the landscaping that we've done is that we are not attractive enough to these big farmers. We do not provide the incentive that they need. I would give you an example. America is I don't know, is it for 300 people there, the population? I think it's maybe one third of the African continent population, but it's the biggest pharmaceutical market on this world, and it allows innovations, and it's easy for manufacturers to get access to all the states. I know most of us look at the US, for example, as a country, but it's actually a subcontinent. Those states there are over 50 states that have, different governmental systems. But when it comes to investment in certain sectors, in certain important sectors, they're actually a single market. They're just a one country. Africa, we do not have the advantage, for example, of having manufacturers within the continent, but we still want to regulate them independently. Every country, Burundi wanting to regulate Pfizer same way as the United States of America, it will not simply will not work. We saw during COVID, and I think Dr. Moga said, we got those vaccines when the pandemic was nearly coming to an end, because the developers saw no incentive to come to us. I know of countries that approved those vaccines or allowed them to enter their countries without having to see even the development information or the dossiers or even the sites that are manufacturing those, because no one was interested. We were not. Pfizer could not come to Tanzania, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, Burundi, and say, please look at it. All of these people would be asking different questions. They would want to go and visit the sites or do a desk assessment of the manufacturers. It will simply not work. So what AMA is coming to do is to basically provide that incentive where Africa is seen as a single market. Africa is seen as one, and they are able to just produce a submission through one coordinated platform, and they are able to get a single recommendation that will be applicable to all the countries. So that is I think is what we are trying to do, provide a mechanism where Africa is considered as a single regulatory block to allow for these products.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Alex, for this very comprehensive answer. I will now turn to Dr. Priscilla with the question on pharmacovigilance. Dr. Priscilla, why should pharmacovigilance and safety surveillance be understood as core infrastructure of both regulatory decision-making and procurement system, rather than post-market technical function?
Prof, we have lost Dr. Okay, she's back. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yeah. So that's a very important question, which I was trying to say in my presentation, that the challenge is then to secure the quality and the safety and effectiveness post-marketing, the post-market surveillance. So things like product recall, safety concerns. So over the years, many products have been recalled because of safety or quality concerns. And so pharmacovigilance and post-marketing surveillance, market control, they are critical then to make sure that all the products that do not comply with the quality, safety, and effectiveness at registration do not continue to be procured. So that's a very important point. And I didn't want to list, but in my experience at work, like bupivacaine, heavy McCain, you find some manufacturers, they make, it's an anesthetic product. They make products that don't work, although the administrative technique is difficult. So you can't continue procuring from that manufacturer. Oxytocin, the potency issues, you find some products do not have the potency when they're analyzed. And so you can't continue procuring from those manufacturers. Although, of course, the storage chains on distribution affect the quality of the products, but really and truly, pharmacovigilance and market authorization, and market control. It's not pharmacovigilance only, it's monitoring substandard products, counterfeit products, that whole package. And this is why I'm happy that the AfriVigilance Made Safety app now has tools for monitoring both safety and quality, so that there's early detection of these things, and we need to share information as countries. So that is my submission. But I have many examples, Mr. Chair, where products have been discontinued on the market because of the vigilance and market control systems in place. So we really need to strengthen those systems, I believe. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priscilla, for the clear and concise response. Now, I would like to ask Dr. Morga about equitable partnerships in practice. Dr. Morga, in your experience, what clearly distinguishes an equitable health partnership from one that still reproduces dependency, even when it is well-funded and or technically supportive? I hope that my question is clear.
So what distinguishes equitable partnership? Is that what you talk about? Sorry.
So what clearly distinguishes an equitable health partnership from one that still reproduces dependency even when it is well-funded or technically supported?
That's a difficult question because theoretically, you could say the ingredient that I put in the first slides and say these are equal partnerships, even if one has the funding and one doesn't. Let me give you an example of what's happening right now. So, do I mention the countries? So, well, okay, the US signed an MOU with Kenya and with many other countries about so the US will give funding, and they called it partnerships, okay? So they would give funding for HIV and for mother and child care, maternity health and all that. These are the programs that were starved of funding when the US suddenly decided to cut aid. That's not equal partnership to cut aid suddenly, by the way. But anyway, so to return the funding, you have to give them your data. You have to commit to give them if there is a pathogen that may have a pandemic kind of character, you have to give them the pathogen, despite the negotiation that's happening in the multilateral system in Geneva, where all countries are together negotiating what to do with this pathogen. That we give the pathogen, and in return, we need the medicine, the vaccine, and the money that they make, as a slice of the money, the huge profit that companies make, and the technology. And this is the debate. There's nothing agreed in Geneva yet. And yet the US comes and say, well, you gave me your pathogen. So in some countries signed that MOU. I guess it was just kind of sudden, quickly, let's do it kind of thing. But then you come to Zambia, I think Zimbabwe as well, said no, because part of this partnership was that they wanted the minerals from Zambia, nothing to do with health, Zambia and Zimbabwe, to share their minerals or to give their minerals to American companies. And the two countries said, excuse me, no. And I think Ghana said no. There was a number of countries said no, because they value what they have. That's what made it equal. That the Americans are coming with money, we don't have money, but we have something you want, and we're not going to give it unless we have equal partnership. So negotiation is still going on. So it's a bit, the other thing I feel strongly about access to medicine is that it's not just the money, it's also the technology. This is critical. We're not going to have sustainable access to medicine without developing the technology in our continent, which means our governments have to fund, look after tertiary education, research institution, and really prioritize research in medical and probably in other things as well in our countries, and collaborate. You can't build a research institution in each country, but collaborate to have it at a continental or regional, whatever, even between 2 or 3 countries, so that you pull all your resources, because we don't have lots of money, we don't have lots of funding, but let's pull all our resources. That's the money resources and the brain resources. We have lots of brains that have no way to go except by going the brain drain to join universities or pharmaceutical companies in the north. Our government must harness this. And then that will raise our position in negotiation, in partnerships.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Moga, for answering very well to these tough questions. So my final question is for Mr. Robert. Mr. Robert, from a continental policy perspective, what are the most important levers African institutions should prioritize to reduce dependency while strengthening collective bargaining power in health systems? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And it's been a joy listening to my other panelists share their experience and also bring us up to speed on what is happening on the continent. I think from a continental policy perspective, for me, three things stand out. And the first has been mentioned already, but for emphasis, the African Medicines Agency. This is a game changer. And as Alex said, it is not an aspiration anymore. This is now the agency that is going to help us to harmonize, to systematize, and make our markets easier, not only for external parties, but for ourselves as a continent to be able to get drugs across the continent. Imagine having to register a drug between African countries, just a single drug. The complexity that we face among ourselves and how that has slowed how we can scale up, even before we look at external parties coming in. That is one. The second area that I think that we, from a continental perspective, is the pool procurement. So until we get to the point where we are manufacturing what we need, we have to buy. So the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust would have shown the power of collective bargaining, which is in practice now. This we must extend to ARVs, diagnostics, and laboratory commodities if we are talking about HIV and AIDS. We have a huge market, as has been said, 1.5 billion people. And if we aggregate and buy pool procurement, I think that would also be an area that can help us while we learn how to do the things that we need to do. The third, and I think this is the anchor, is the political decisions. I think the political will for our governments to want to do what we are talking about. So one is to route procurement through African national and regional systems. We have countries across the continent, a lot has been mentioned here, who have very strong regulatory and also procurement systems in place that we can buy, we can use to get these things done. So as mentioned, the missing ingredient is no more capacity, but the political will do that. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roberts. And many thanks to our panelists for their very informative answers. We will have another interesting opportunity for discussion after this panels. Across manufacturing, regulation, pharmacovigilance, procurement system, and global partnership, where do you see the true binding constraint? Constraint to health sovereignty in Africa today, and what is realistic reform that could shift within the next 3-4 years? Just one question that I think we can answer after Mr. Roberts, and we will have the floor after this panel to talk about some other topics. So let's stop there, and we will move now to discussion, open discussion, and we are now going to open 10 to 15 minutes discussion based on the question you have asked in the chat. This question have been sorted by topic to avoid the duplication. And I have one question for Mr. Alex. Mr. Alex, is there a database of African medicines, vaccine, and diagnostic manufacturer anywhere? Some of them are quite challenging to engage with.
Yes, there is a database. It's called Amina. It's hosted by the Africa CDC, and I've posted the link on the chat. You can go there. It has, I think, now has maybe 18 to 20 manufacturers, 18 to 20 member states manufacturers, but there are over 600 there. If you have any specific challenges with reaching out or contacting any of them, you can use the email address that is provided under the same link under Africa CDC. Africa CDC has a platform for manufacturing on the continent, and they consolidate everything there. Over.
Thank you so much, and thank you for answering for a question during your during the panel. But I have another question for you, Mr. Alex. In reference to supporting access to quality assured HIV medicines, the issue of standard and falsified medicines is a serious challenge for Africa. Please share on any specific regional intervention. Agency Medicine in Africa is working to ensure locally manufactured medicines and vaccines are quality and safe, even able to be consumed in other markets.
Thank you, Prof. I've also responded to that on the chat. In the interest of time, maybe I'll just summarize. Yeah,
okay.
Just summarize maybe for the benefits of everybody. So the African Medicines Agency is currently developing a continental strategy for fight against substandard and falsified medical products. And it is a multi-sectoral kind of a strategy involving all players from the judiciary systems, police, immigration or border management, and regulators across the continent. And we are creating also arms such as the network of African Alliance Labs to assist in testing. We are also going to use, I think Priscilla mentioned, the AfriVigilance. AfriVigilance is a safety database for African safety data that we'll be consolidating. We are going to link that one with what we are calling the Continental Safety Monitoring System, which will be linked to the global safety monitoring system that is hosted by WHO, so that we are able to track. And in addition to that, we're also going to launch something known as the some sort of a watch list for those manufacturers that are considered problematic or they've had issues before, or this will also include products that are usually prone to certain kinds of maybe quality or safety problems, so that we are able to establish mechanisms to deliberately follow those on the market once they enter. Over.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alex, for summarizing this. And thank you for the question and contribution from participants. What we have heard today is that health sovereignty depends on how well financing, policy, regulation, procurement, and partnerships work together. As we move to the close of this session, we turn to the continental perspective on how these elements come together in practice and what priorities should guide the next phase of action. Our final speaker is Mr. Robert Aguergo, Senior Strategic Advisor for Health in the Office of the Commissioner for Health, Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development at the African Union Commission. A public health and development strategist is with more than 3 decades of experience. He has worked across health financing, health security, epidemic preparedness, and health system strengthening at national, regional, and global levels. He will help us reflect on the continental commitment, coordination mechanisms, and the strategic priorities needed to advance Africa's health sovereignty agenda and sustain progress beyond this webinar series. Please join us in welcoming again Mr. Robert. And Mr. Robert, you have 10 minutes, but in the interest of time, it will be better if you can summarize in only 5 minutes. Thank you so much in advance.
Thank you again, Prof. And the organizers. I just want to start with a short story that nearly 25 years ago, I led a study on the impact of HIV and AIDS on older people in Africa, using Zimbabwe as a case study. About 685 older persons, 1,800 orphaned children, 73% of those children were raised by people over the age of 60. At that time, treatment was not available. Resources were very little or gone, and older people became the last line. That lesson has stayed with me a long time. Things have changed. In the last 20, 25 years, we have had the Global Fund, we've had PEPFAR, governments have stepped in, civil society, and partnerships have come around. We have seen that there's been improvement in access to treatment. The millions of people that we have now on treatment represents one of the greatest achievements of multilateralism that we have seen. Communities have carried this response on their shoulders for 4 decades, and I think we are at a junction where we can applaud ourselves for some of the achievements that has been done. But at the same time also, there is to take stock and look at what needs to be done going forward. In January of last year, PEPFAR funding was suspended, and care for over 20.6 million people was placed at risk, including about 550 children. This is the vulnerability that the continent sits with. And I think we have mentioned that before. And as Dr. Nyambayo said, Africa carries 65% of the global HIV and AIDS burden. We have about 30 million people living with the virus. However, domestic government financing covers roughly about 20% of the response. So you have a continent that is relying on the benevolence of others to be able to take care of its own problem. We have built a system, a life-saving program on a structurally fragile foundation. And this is something that we need to fix as soon as possible. So what has the 3 seminars taught us? I think the first seminar was on the money. The second looked at the law and the frameworks, policies, and systems. And today we've looked at the delivery systems that need to be in place for us to be able to deliver on the promises. What we have seen across anytime there's a crisis on this continent, whether it is HIV and AIDS, we saw the delays that it took before ARVs became available on the continent. We heard of the COVID experience, and it is the same for others. We are now sitting with an Ebola crisis where there are no vaccines. The continent has, quote unquote, not fully prepared itself for something that has been plaguing us since 1976 thereabouts. So the continent's vulnerability and level of unpreparedness is something that cannot be overestimated. There are 5 questions I want to put for us to take beyond this as we carry the conversation forward. Who finances response on the continent? While domestic finances must be protected, that protection is not enough. It must translate into budget execution, reaching the population who needs it. So the first question is, when we have a crisis or the crises that we have, who is financing them and how should it be financed? The second question I'm putting across is, who produces what we need? We've heard of a continent that is sitting with, I think, 2%, some even say 1% of its vaccine needs. This is not sustainable. It is simply not sustainable not to be able to have the medication that you need, the diagnostics that you need, to be always reliant on other manufacturing capacity outside and even procurement capacities that is outside the continent. Third is, who procures and regulates? So who financing, who produces, and even when we are buying, most of the time we don't use our own system, we are using external systems. So we are not even building the capacities of our own institutions as we go along. The fourth and fifth is, who delivers the service to the people most affected. For HIV, integration into primary healthcare must not mean invisibility to key populations. We must ensure that we take care of community systems, peer networks, and also build on what has already been established. And then finally, who defined the term of partnership? And I think I like Dr. Mokia's term that partnership must be mutually beneficial. It shouldn't be a partnership that is one-sided. And I, from the African Union, can say some of the things you have said. I can only say that kudos for your bravery. We have seen how vulnerable this continent is, be it when we are waiting for medicines to come to us or when we are at the negotiation table. And it is simply because we are not together. We are not working together as a continent. We don't need everyone to produce medicines. We don't need everyone to produce diagnostics. We can look at our individual capacities and be able to work together. So what must be done? And here I'm wrapping up. I think at the government, political level, for HIV and AIDS, we must protect HIV and AIDS financing, but it must be connected, because a budget line alone does not save lives. It must be linked to the procurement systems that we've spoken about, the laboratory capacity, community development, delivery, and other things that we've spoken. The second is for continental institutions such as the African Union, the Africa CDC, the Medicines Agency, AU NEPAD, and the Regional Economic REX. Here, they must help create scale and coherence, because no single African country can do this on its own. No single African country can negotiate with the superpowers that we've mentioned and have a very good negotiation outcome. So it is when we go together as a continent that we can do that. And then thirdly, I think we've mentioned the partnership. The partnerships that we engage in must be beneficial. It must be there must be benefit on it. And it mustn't be a partnership where we go in to hand over the legacy of our generations to come for today's goods and services. So I think I will stop here and say that this has been a very good series of seminars, and going forward, I look forward to engaging with others on how some of these promises and some of these can be brought to beneficial use for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robert, for those thoughtful reflections and for helping us situate today's discussion within the broader continent agenda. And thank you so much also for raising 5 very, very important questions. Thank you to all our speakers for your insightful and substantive contribution, and to all participants for your engagement throughout this session. We will now take a few minutes to look at the Mentimeter result from the first question, today's question, and we will answer 2 more questions in the next few minutes. So you can scan again your QR code, and we start with the first questions. This is the first one. So the 2 main words was funding and policy. So we don't have time to yes. This is the result of the first question. So I think in the interest of time, we can skip this, but we see that there are funding and policy, and we can come back after. So second question, please. Second question. Based the discussion, which area requires the greatest investment to strengthen long-term access to HIV medicines and diagnostic in your country? So you have time to answer. We see your answer: local manufacturing, procurement and supply chain system, and regional market cooperation. So these are the 3 main responses. Thank you for that. We can move to the next question. As countries move toward greater ownership on HIV programs, what principle should guide future partnership? Please answer. Please continue to answer. So I see some answers about technical, financial, and strategic support aligned with national needs, sovereignty and protect human lives, national leadership, partner support, sustainable country ownership, one size fits all doesn't work, collaboration, equity, what is raised is technical, financial, and strategic support aligned with national needs and national leadership partner support. So thank you for answering this question. We move to the next. So based on today's discussion, which reform will most strengthen health sovereignty and resilience in your country over the next 12 months? So I see strengthening procurement, also improving regional cooperation, and focusing on domestic financing. Thank you. The last one. In one sentence, what message will you take forward from this webinar series to strengthen sustainable and resilient HIV response in Africa? So I see sustainability of HIV response in Africa depends on strong national leadership, sustainable financing, and resilient health system. Single regulatory blocks can actually bypass some local problems, strengthening regional antiretroviral production hubs, intra-African partnerships, collaborative system first, and partnership with African countries. So we can wait more few seconds for more answers if you have. I think this is the last question, and thank you very much for your responses. I think we can summarize now this webinar, and what has emerged clearly from this discussion is that the health sovereignty is not achieved through a single intervention. It depends on how multiple systems work together in practice: manufacturing capacity, regulatory systems and pharmacovigilance, procurement and supply chain architecture, governance of global health partnerships. We have also heard that while important progress is being made, particularly through the African medicines agencies, emerging manufacturing capacity, and regional procurement mechanisms, the system remain incomplete. Regulatory harmonization is advancing, but manufacturing investment is still uneven. Procurement reform is possible, but politically complex. And partnership models continue to reflect external priorities in ways that limit full African ownership. The key insight from both the discussion and Mentimeter result is that health sovereignty depends on whether Africa can align financing, regulation, procurement, manufacturing, and partnership into one coherent and functioning system. I would like to conclude with the central message: sustainability in HIV and health responses therefore depends not only on financing and policy frameworks, but on whether Africa can shape the systems that produce, regulate, procure, and deliver health products. We are reaching the end of this webinar. On behalf of the African-led HIV Control Working Group, I would like to sincerely thank all speakers, participants, interpreters, and partners for contributing to this series. This concludes the webinar and the 3 parts series. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.